let's get going, Kath. Thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Thank you for
I'm
having
super
me.
excited. I didn't actually ask you, where are you in the world right now? Because you've been traveling around. Like, where are you right now?
I'm home. I got home today after a month of travel. So I've come via Melbourne, via Perth, via Miami, via Washington, DC. So it's been a month on the road of speaking and lots of different events and meetings and talking to like-minded people and things like that. But back home in Sydney in the Northern Beaches. So I've got a week to get my washing sorted, and then it's back on the road.
I was saying to a friend of mine, it's now like what we're in October. It's about now I get the biggest FOMO I ever experienced because I've got my WhatsApp group of my cricket team in Adelaide that is pinging, and they're all going to games, and I'm like, in England, it's getting darker in the mornings, it's getting darker earlier in the evenings, it's getting colder, and it's the most FOMO I experience in my life. So I have to really channel everything I possibly can right now because I know it's heating up where you are. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, have you always been in Sydney? I guess let's lead in with a little bit of like your early background, like where you're from, how you got into sport, and then we'll sort of go from there. So start wherever you want to start on that journey.
Yeah, I guess my youngest and most fondest memories are spending time where my dad's from in country New South Wales. So my dad was a cop. He was a cop for 40 years. He's now retired, but spent a long time serving in the police force. And I guess a home was in Sydney, but my fondest memories are in the backyard playing cricket with I've got three older brothers. So I'm the youngest and only girl. So playing cricket in the backyard with my brothers in Finley, and in a town like Finley, it's population 1,500. There's no Wi-Fi and computers and all that kind of stuff there. So you really just start to connect with the land, and being active is the way that you entertain yourself. So there's a swimming pool, a couple of fish and chip shops, and an RSL club in Finley. And if I wasn't in the pool, then I was playing cricket in the backyard with my brothers, or hitting a tennis ball up against a brick wall in the school across the road and things like that. So I fell in love with the game very early, and I think it was due to my dad and brother's influence. So they weren't as obsessed with cricket as what I was, but I just loved it. Hey, I think someone always, like, whenever I sort of say how much I love cricket and sport in general, people say, why cricket? And I can never articulate exactly what's so special about the game. Like, I think if you know, because you've played and all that kind of stuff. But the only thing I can really say is there's nothing like, I'm not, we talk about mindfulness and things like that. And I think a lot of the time it's so often associated with people downloading expensive apps and having, calming music in the background. And that's completely fine and okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But for me, it doesn't do the trick. But there was nothing like stepping out onto that field or on the right side of the rope, as in the inside of the playing arena, with 10 of your best mates, that was like a family, and just having a bit of fun, but also competing against the other team that you're playing against, and your triumphs are your team's triumphs, and same as your failures, you're sharing those as well. And I just loved it, and that was my greatest form of meditation. I always felt like I never had anywhere more important to be than when I was playing cricket. And there's never any place that I would prefer to have been either, be it in a professional or personal capacity. So I just loved it. My mind would always stop still, and time would stop still when I was playing on the field. And very, very young age, I fell in love with it, just with my brothers, and then obviously went on to play in competitions and things like that, which was fun too.
I think the thing about cricket for me, like we on our start of the podcast chat, just before we met each other there, you spoke about how you kind of not really involved in the game, but your connections to the game are through your friendships. I think that's its
Yeah.
unique thing. Like if I think about every team I've played in, I've essentially played in 4 teams in my life, and that's 3 club teams and then 1 professional team. And I regard the fact that I have friendship groups or people in those each of those teams, that I now have I know I will have friendships for life through those. And it's the sport. It's not like a football match where you turn up, and I'm saying football, not Aussie rules football, our football, soccer football.
Okay.
Is that like, yeah, over here it's like a 90-minute games, right? So you turn up, you might turn up at say 1 o'clock for the game, but then you'll leave at maybe 5, 6 o'clock, or maybe if you stay later. But cricket, you're there from I mean, when you're playing a game in Australia or you're playing a first class match, you're pretty much there at 8, 9 in the morning, and then you leave. Well, you can be leaving the bar at whenever you want, really, and it's an all day thing, right? So it's
Yeah.
just the time with people. It has its good and bad parts, but it's just time with people, and I think that's the real cool part of it. It's just a community. It's real team feeling, like everyone's in it, as well as the actual sport itself being challenging on many different fronts, both technically, mentally, physically. There's a lot going on, and I think that for me is why it's a unique sport. It requires so many different assets of you that, as well, are really transferable into life. Do you draw upon a lot of the skills, and or have you maybe had time to reflect on some of the skill sets and traits that you've had when you were playing that you can now use in what you're doing now?
Yeah, I don't think they've ever been conscious, but absolutely, if I was to reflect back now, just I think even, we mentioned in the pre-chat, cricket's not something that I've ever failed to love, even post-career ending injuries and things like that. However, what I probably had in passion and love for the game, I lacked in skill. So I wasn't a naturally gifted player by any stretch. And I had that many knockbacks and never picked for selection and all those sorts of things. But I guess that sort of instilled a grittiness in me. And again, being from the bush and things like that, you sort of have that grittiness about you. But I really had to have a lot of, there was a lot of stubborn kind of conversations that I had, and a lot of with myself, more so to go, what do you want? Like, is this what you want? Because if it is, you're going to have to really work hard for this. And I think in, starting any business, I've now got a global kind of not-for-profit that operates in 3 countries. You need to have that kind of grit and that stubborn nature about you to fight for what you believe in as well, I think. And so I dare say that's one of the biggest things I've gotten out of that, but also to be passionate about everything that you do. So for me, the reward of, debuting for my state, for example, or playing in the UK for Middlesex and things like that, they were some of the most euphoric feelings in my life. And I don't think it's necessarily 100% because of the prestige that comes with that, saying that you represented your state or a county or something like that. I think it's because of the hard work that it took to get there, to be honest, that made it such a rewarding experience for me. And I'll forever be grateful for that, that, I never gave up, and I didn't have what if I had done this, or what if I had chosen that? I went hard at it, and with that comes some really good things, but also some of it was the detriment of my health, of course, and all those sorts of things. But I wouldn't change any of it.
It's amazing, isn't it? Like I'm very, very similar. Your story, especially with how your career ended, resonates with me. Very, very similar. I think just past when you finish your career and you look back, you're like, there's a very easy moment when you're transitioning, like the what ifs come in. Oh, what if I'd done that? Maybe if I'd done this differently. And I'm a big believer in it's natural to have those, and you should feel them, because if you disregard them, if you disregard those negative feelings that are cropping up, then it could manifest itself in a multitude of ways. It could be an obsession and addiction. It could be anger. It could be resentment. It could be whatever. And that's just painful to heart. I'd far rather get rid of that internally than not. And I'm interested to know, like, during your transition out of the sport, where you were, what were you sort of going through? I've worked with and have come across and know a lot of athletes that have transitioned out of the sport. Was it a easy thing? Where was your mind at and in that period?
Yeah, I guess my story is probably a little bit different to most, in that it was a very quick and sudden kind of injury that prevented me from playing any further. So it wasn't something that I ever could have comprehended was coming. And I was very young at the time as well. So I think I was 24 when I broke my back playing cricket. And having such a significant injury, you sort of get thrown into this catastrophic several months of obviously a lot of surgery. And for me, I guess the added complexity of living with a disability came as well. So it was not only this dream that I'd had of, wanting to play cricket for New South Wales, and beyond that, if it had occurred, if the trajectory didn't change, I was now dealing with, life in a wheelchair, never going to walk again, can't feel anything below my waist, and all those sorts of things. So I think there were a lot of complexities in my transition out of the game. But if I can try and recall or call on some of the ones I think might resonate with others that have gone through an experience, it was a loss of identity for the most part. So, for so long, or for my entire life, since I was a little girl, since I was 8, I'd wanted to be a cricketer. Like I was just obsessed with the idea. I loved it. I loved playing with my mates. I loved the mateship. I loved the companionship. As I mentioned earlier, there's something so special about the game. And when you sort of lose the ability to play, I feel like I lost part of myself, or I felt like I did. I've since overcome that and processed that properly. But at the time, the only thing that I thought that was interesting about me, or that I was good at, or that I even wanted to do was to play cricket. And I guess it's a very one-dimensional and dangerous way of viewing yourself, right? There are so many facets to all of us that make us so beautiful and interesting and wonderful and unique. And I often say to kids that I speak to, we're all so uniquely beautiful, like boys, girls, whomever. Not beautiful in that we're in the cover of a magazine or anything like that, but we're all individual and we're all different. And think about this for a second. The world would be a very, very boring place if we all looked the same or behaved the same or had the same ideas and all. The thing that makes life so incredible is that we all have different experiences that shape us into the people that we are, and we can learn and grow with each other at any given time. And so when I sort of suffered that injury, I remember going through a rehab process, which felt incredibly lonely at times because, here I am trying to walk again and my mates are out playing for Australia. And I felt so happy and euphoric for them. But also at the same time, I was just like, I just wish I could be out there with them doing the same thing and sharing in the laughter and sharing in the triumph of whatever they were doing and things like that. So it was a tough experience. And I'll never forget, the first summer here in Australia when I, was no longer a cricketer. And I thought, it'll be okay. I wonder what, non-athlete or non-cricketers do in the summer. And, you see it all on people's social media and the TV. They're out there going to the beach and putting the suntan lotion on and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, beauty, I'll pack a towel, I'll pack an umbrella, and I'll off to the beach I go in October. And I was driving my way towards it, and I was like, well, I'll call people to meet them there and tell them to meet me at the beach. And as I went through my call list of all my closest friends who I would have wanted to have been at the beach with, I got that kind of reality hit where I was like, well, they're all out on the cricket field. They won't even be able to answer me. They'll be fielding or batting or doing something. So I can't even enjoy the beach with my mates because not only my world had become so small and insular that, my friendship groups were all in cricket, and I hadn't branched out and met different people when I was at uni studying, for example, because I was always having to be at training or at my part-time job or whatever it was in addition to studying. I sort of told myself I didn't need new friends at uni, so I won't sort of open myself up to friendships at uni because I've got so many good friends that I'm going to be training with later or playing a game with on the weekend and all those sorts of things. And as an athlete, you can make your world very small and very insular. And I think that's a danger for any athlete out there, not just necessarily with cricket, is that we're more than our sport and we're more than being an athlete. I've done a lot of work with LeBron James's company in the US called Uninterrupted, and their entire identity as an organization, or their slogan is more than an athlete. And I love the work that they do in breaking down that for athletes, in that, yes, you get paid to do this, and yes, you're very good, and it's what everyone tells you that you're interesting for, but there's more to you. You're a dad, or you're a brother, or you're a son, or a sister, or whatever it is that you're doing. You're great at cooking, and you love going for walks, and you love singing, or whatever it is. I think it's so important for us to be more than our sport when we're athletes. And I learned that the hard way, in every way, in that I've now got a hugely balanced life, in that I've got a great job that I love, that I'm really passionate about. I've got great friends from all walks of life that have very different and unique experiences. And I'm still able to stay in touch with my friends from cricket. My best friend still plays, all that kind of stuff. But certainly learned the hard way that we need to be a bit more multifaceted as athletes. And we always think, I've done heap of work with rookie athletes as well, in sharing my story with them, not as a warning, but more so to say, it's a reality. It can happen to everyone. We always think that we're invincible, don't we? That will never happen to me. I'll never break my back, or I'll never, get injured, or I'll never suffer loss. Or but it happens to all of us, and it could be you, and all you got to do is put a foot wrong, and something can happen in life, and it doesn't have to be that we're at fault. It just means that that's just part of life, and we all suffer adversity at certain points. So it happened to me, and I learned the hard way that I probably should have been doing the work a little bit earlier. Not in case, just it's a healthy way.
I'm interested to know what you learned about yourself during, because you've had so many both physical, emotional moments and traumas that have happened throughout your life. But even with, let's take the loss of your cricket career, that's a trauma in some shape or form. I'm curious to know about what you've learned about yourself now that you lean on, that's a really positive attribute having come out of those experiences. Something that maybe you didn't know, you weren't maybe paying attention to yourself, that you kind of see as a strength now in your life.
Yeah, I would say self-acceptance has been one of the biggest things that has allowed me, I guess, to do what I'm doing now, to be the person that I am now, but also to have overcome the things that I have. And I think without self-awareness in that picture, you can't really have self-acceptance. And so I think it's important for all of us, adversity or not, challenge or not, suffering or not, whatever it is, that we can always afford to do a bit of an internal scan on ourselves. How am I going today? Did I act in accordance of the person who I am? Do I even know who I am? Like, what are my top 5 values, for example? And it's an exercise that I do with a lot of my clients. Is for us to be speaking in front of a room full of, say, 100 people, and I was to say to them, raise your hand honestly, do you know what your top 5 values are as a person? And there's never more than, say, 2 people out of 100, so 2% of that room, that would know who they are really. And that's nothing to be ashamed of, because prior to me actually going through any of my struggles, I had no idea who I was outside of a cricketer. And it's a really easy exercise to go through. You just go onto Google and type in personal values, and all sorts of things will pop up. And so for me, those things are like, obviously, will be no shock to you, but kindness is a big one to myself and to others. And so is gratitude, and so is humor. I use humor a lot. Sometimes people perceive it to be as inappropriate, but I use it as a coping mechanism a lot of the time, so that I can get through the hour that I need to get through, but then I can process later and go back to it and all those sorts of things. And the reason I ask a lot of my clients to do that is because if we don't know who we are, how can we ever think that we're going to overcome a challenge? Because we don't really know what makes us tick. And so for me, going through the multiple adversities that I did, again, it was learn, review for me, because the hits just kept coming. And so when I went through my first broken back and loss of a cricket career and things like that, I was sort of floundering around going, well, how am I going to figure this out? I better get a job. I didn't really know how to cope with the multitude of different things that kept popping up into my life. And the more I went through, the more self-awareness I started to find. Well, I've been through 3 significant adversities. When I get to the 4th one, what worked the first time? It was this. What worked the second time? It was a combination of this. What worked the third time? And so thankfully for me, again, I am kind of grateful for my life in that I've probably learned more about myself through my adversities than I would have if I hadn't have gone through them. And I don't wish that a lot of them happened, but I am glad that I've taken those learnings forward and that I've put them into something, or channeled them into something that I'm proud to lead now. So, and I guess my job now is to sort of, none of us are ever going to, I don't need to tell you this, you've been through your own stuff, but none of us are ever going to go through life without suffering to some degree, or going through some significant life-changing circumstance or adversity. But we don't have to wait for those moments to happen before we start to implement some of the strategies that can make us better people always. So sort of always say to people, it's not a warning, but why not do the work now when you've got the mental capacity to be able to do it, so that if you do suffer that adversity, well, not if, when you do, or the next time it happens, that you've got a bit of that self-awareness to know and understand what makes you tick and what might make things easier for you. So I dare say that's my biggest learning from all of the things that I've been through, is to have that level of understanding of self.
I use a bit of an exercise with clients I work with, and I'm exactly on that same page, and I go through that same process. What are your values? What are you about? Who do you want to be as a person? But also when they're going through a tough period, or if they can envisage going through a tough period. Because let's say as an athlete, it's quite easy that you're going to get injured, right? You're going to face an injury, whether it's your own fault or not, right? Just stuff happens. But one of the questions I ask people is like, who do you want to be in that moment that when you look back on it in, say, a year's time, you're proud of how you handled it? And then usually they get to the answers of how they want to go around that situation, that scenario. And then maybe they can draw upon that same thing. Well, I was actually really proud of myself in the past of how I did this, this, and this. Or maybe I didn't do this when adversity happened, and I've learned that that's the thing I want to do. Great, I've got the awareness of I want to do that in the future. I really loved that whole idea of doing something before the precipice or the crisis happens. And I listened to a podcast you'd done, and the story you told of a CEO or a business guy that came to you and said, like, look, Kath, I've had a pretty easy ride, but I don't believe I have to go through an adversity to start doing something. So what can I do? Can you talk about that story just real quick? It's a really fascinating story, especially on this concept of not having to wait to go through an adversity in order to find the tools and the ways of coming out of one.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a very dear friend of mine who's actually a director or sits on our advisory board at Kindness Factory. And I guess for the most part, as I travel the world speaking and sharing my story, for every one story I tell, I reckon I hear at least 100 more because people resonate with that. And it's a huge privilege. Absolutely, it is. And for the most part, people resonate with my story because they have gone through something significant, be it the loss of someone or a career-ending injury or any kind of injury, or there are so many facets, I think, through my own story that people can resonate with. And so that's a great response. And I love the fact that people feel comfortable enough to share back with me. And this one in particular, it was really interesting because, I don't want to mention his name without his permission, but I'm sure he wouldn't mind, but I won't just in case. I'd spent, as a sports administrator, which is what I did post-injury, but prior to leading Kindness Factory, which I do now and speaking. But I'd spent, 7 years as a sports administrator in cricket operations, so running events and games around the country. And he was in a very senior leadership, sort of an executive role at Cricket Australia at this point in time. And so, I guess hierarchically, I had a lot of respect for him. And then it wasn't until sort of 3 years post that career that I'd, started speaking and doing more that I got approached by Cricket Australia to come and deliver a keynote about kindness and purpose and giving back and self-kindness and all those sorts of things. And he sat in the audience, and obviously I've respected this man for a long time. He was always very kind to me, and but hadn't really had too many touch points. And inbox messages start firing after every keynote that I deliver, and one of them was from him just saying, we'd spent the best part of 7 years sort of working inadvertently together, and I had no idea. I'd heard your story, but I had no idea the complexities and the struggles that existed within that. And he said, next time you're in town, could you let me know? He lives in a different state. I said, of course. And I did, and we ended up having a coffee, and he said, look, I don't want to be presumptuous or anything like that, but I was wondering how I could help. And I sort of looked at him. I said, well, there are many ways you could help. You could log an act of kindness. We're trying to get it, at that point, we're trying to get to 1 million and all this kind of stuff. And I said, but if you wanted to help in a more, in a deeper way, I think your experience would add a lot of value in sort of like an advisory panel or a directorship or something like that in a voluntary way. And I said, if you don't mind me asking, what's compelled you to reach out? And he said, I guess sitting in that keynote, many people must take many things from you because it's incredible. But what I took is that for the most part, my life's been very privileged. I've never gone through any kind of suffering in any way, touch wood. I've never had to, wonder where my next meal's coming from. My parents always provided for me. I went to a great school. I had great mates. I've got a great wife. I've got great kids. And I think what I learned was a lot of perspective in hearing you speak, but also that I'm very fortunate and privileged, and why wait? And I was just like, I sat there, and it was quite a profound moment for me because for so long I'd been hearing from so many people who were just in crisis or suffering, and I was so glad to be able to help them. And I was just like, well, here it is, a perfect example of someone just wanting to spring into action. My favorite quote, and it's a quote my dad gave me that I hung above my bed when I was a kid. It's the world is changed by your example, not by your opinion. And I love it because there's so many people that have great ideas or great thoughts on how they want to change the world or change this person or do this or climb a mountain, write a book, all that kind of stuff, but no one actually does it. And so that quote always resonated with me. It's more important to try or to do something than to think about doing it. Because an idea is only going to stay an idea unless you start to act on it. And that kind of, it took me back to that moment with my dad, with him. And, kind of a full circle moment, that same man, only 2 years later, had a very traumatic experience with his son, where his son went through a very near-death experience. And I was so glad that I could help him in that way as well. Like when he, rang me to tell me he couldn't make the board meeting and it was because of this, it's giving me goosebumps now. It was really nice to go, wow. So it does happen to all of us. And thankfully for him, he'd done a lot of the work and the self-reflection prior to that to be able to go, I can cope. I want to be the strong person that I need to be for my son right now and for my family, and to provide emotionally, not necessarily just financially in these moments. So it's a really great moment that I was able to share with him throughout, that process, but to support him back when he'd supported the movement and all that kind of stuff as well. But we don't have to wait. We don't even from a goal setting perspective, like, you so often hear about the people who, get the cancer diagnosis or they get in the car accident or whatever, and they're the ones that decide to climb a mountain or write a book or, jump out of an airplane because they consider that life's too short because they've had this, profound experience. And we don't have to wait for that. We just need to give ourselves permission to be a bit kinder to ourselves, I think, sometimes. And I think so often, purpose, it's such an overcomplicated concept for so many different people. But I think when we're aligned to something bigger than ourselves, again, adversity becomes so much easier to manage as well, because we know that we're fighting towards something, not just existing. And so there's some of the common things that keep popping up through conversations like that one as well.
Yeah, that's such an amazing story, and I really hope that inspires a lot of people that especially probably feel that I can't really figure out where the adversity is in my life. I also do believe that we have, whether it's the scale of those adversities could be different. It could be something as simple as someone at school telling you weren't good enough to do something, or you didn't get the grades right. But we forget that, and you can lean on that, and the meaning we put behind those experiences is really important to remember and go back to. I really want to now go into kindness and the kindness factory, but kind of leading into that, I'm interested to know, when was a moment or a period of your life where you were unkind to yourself?
I think many times, without going into my story too much, because I don't want to give the bait and then people, but there's so many, I guess, experiences where you can sort of Google my name and look up my story and things. But in 2012, I lost my partner to suicide, and no grief is ever easy. It's something that I've learned throughout the last sort of 10 years of my life, but the added complexities of the mental health struggle at play, and I guess the nature in which he passed, it really tortured me for a good, it never leaves you. Grief never leaves you. It just gets a little bit easier day by day, and time's a great healer. And I think the 10 months after his passing, I wasn't necessarily directly unkind to myself, but, in searching for the unknown that you always have in a suicide, I probably had a little bit of pent up anger toward myself, not to my partner, which is, I've learned, is a very uncommon response. A lot of people sort of say to me, you must be angry at him. And anger is not something that I felt toward him. It was a lot to myself. And I was very unkind in that I probably judged, why didn't I do enough? Why didn't I see the warning signs? Why didn't, and it was just torture for 10 months. And I had to try and find a way to let that go, and not necessarily let him go, but let the experience of how he passed and that circumstance go, in that, we never truly know what a person's going through, even if they are your everything and they are your person and all those sorts of things. And, I neglected a lot of things. So I avoided all kind of conversation around him, his passing, the grief that I was suffering, and avoidance was my only coping mechanism at that point. And I just didn't allow any self-compassion or any kind of kindness towards myself. And it wasn't until I connected with a great therapist who really allowed me to see how unkind I was being toward myself, really, in that. And it's a great question that, I guess it's a common question that may have popped up, and I dare say you would have, heard this many times, but a therapist gives you that kind of bird's eye view of yourself that you can't seem to have when you're doing a self inventory, because when you're ruminating in your own head, there's a great saying, it's that you learn how you feel when you say it out loud. And I've found that absolutely to be true, because if you're in a dialogue, you don't even finish your sentences. You're like, oh, you should have done this, you should have done that, you're not good enough, all that kind of stuff. Whereas if you're saying that out loud, it's like, wow, why am I talking to myself that way? And a therapist said to me, Kath, in a very non-judgmental way, she was like, let's say that this was your friend going through this loss and all those sorts of things, and you heard them saying the things that you're saying out loud now. No judgment. If you believe that these are true, then that's okay. We'll work through that. But if this was your best friend sitting in this seat right here, and she was telling you about the experiences she'd just been through, how would you respond? Not as a therapist, as a friend. And I'd say, and immediately I was like, oh, I would absolutely tell her that, that's not the case, and that she deserved some compassion, and that this is not her fault, and all this kind of stuff. And she's just like, okay, sort of like got that half slice sort of smile on her face going, can you see why you're probably being a little bit unkind to yourself right now? Because when you take that removed step back, you can actually say, well, no, that's not fair. That's not a fair reflection of the situation. She couldn't have seen it. Like, there's no way. Do you know what I mean? And so it was a great thing for me to be able to do, to go, well, if I wouldn't expect this from someone else, why am I expecting it out of myself? And if I'm, if a friend said that out loud to me, I would just cuddle the hell out of them. Like, I would just wrap them in my arms, and I wouldn't let them go until they told me otherwise. And I think that, so often we're, especially in Australia, and I know I've lived in the UK as well, we can be so hard on ourselves. And here in Australia, we call, tall poppy syndrome. We don't want to get too big of an ego. And I know that in the UK, it's the same thing. I think there are some very big similarities culturally in that respect. And we never afford ourselves the compassion or kindness that we truly deserve, I don't think. And part of my talks now that I give to corporates and school kids, whenever we get onto a plane, what's the first message that we hear? It's the safety message. In case of an emergency, oxygen mask will fall down from the ceiling, put yours on first before helping others. And 10 years ago, I would have said, oh, there's no way I would do that. If I had my 8-year-old nephew next to me, or someone less able, I would absolutely put their oxygen mask on first. And the more I've grown and learned as an adult, is that we can't help others unless we've helped ourselves first. And that requires radical self-acceptance and radical kindness as well. And I'm not talking huge things. I'm talking, getting your favorite coffee, or whatever kindness looks like to you, or patting a dog, or kissing your spouse, or telling them that you love them, or, kindness looks so different to all of us. And it can be a very unique approach or a unique experience in that sense. And the best thing that you can always do is look after yourself first, because we can't look after others unless we've looked after ourselves first. And that's a way that I am able to practice more kindness towards others, is absolutely looking after myself and being kind to myself in the process as well.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm actually really glad you brought up the tall poppy syndrome, because I actually had that down as something I really wanted to talk to you about, because of that exact same thing. Like, I've been in the UK, I live in the UK, I've lived in Australia, and the cultural similarities they're so close. We love tearing the tall poppy down. We just love it. My team, they won't mind me saying this, is that the group of mates that I've got out there, they regard themselves as the wing clippers. So it's like, if you start getting your wings, you get clipped to bring you back down, and that's the whole idea. There are some good parts to that, because it humbles you, it keeps you grounded, it doesn't make you carry away with arrogance and things like that. But there are some negative parts to it, because I was really shocked at, when I left the UK, I knew that there was a mental health pandemic or epidemic in itself growing here. Like, it was bubbling under the surface. This is pre-pandemic, before it got sort of skyrocketed. And then when I came over to Australia, a load of my friends in the UK were like, well, surely they are just loving life. Like, everyone's got a vest on, they're at the beach, they got a cat. They got a beer, they're surfing, it's awesome, right? And then I was in charge of 80 young kids, ranging from 11 to 18. And it blew me away at how similar the mental health issues were. And it came from the fact that they were genuinely being unkind to themselves. They were genuinely being so harsh on themselves at all times. And then when they kind of went to their groups, there's this kind of, tall poppy syndrome and she'll be all right, and everything a lot in between that of trying to level that person out. And I'm interested to see and hear what you're seeing as common ways at the moment that are currently in the environments we're in, because it's very ever changing, that are maybe similarities or ways in which people are being unkind to themselves, and maybe some of the causes, what you think maybe the causes are of this unkindness to ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to say one thing, I would say technology,
Right.
which I guess is a bit of an umbrella term to, there's so many wonderful things about technology. Don't get me wrong. Like I think throughout COVID, we saw, how good was FaceTime? We can't
Yeah.
connect, but we can actually FaceTime. And, I lived abroad 12 years ago in the UK, and I think it was Skype only, and you'd probably make the appointment a week prior. Whereas in lockdown, it was like I was probably speaking to people more than I would without COVID. Do you know what I mean? Like, because I had more time on my hands, I could FaceTime them, and everyone was making it a priority. So there's so many wonderful things that technology has given us. But also, I think social media is an umbrella term of technology. Within that exists social media, and um, I often say to a lot of people, I'm about ready to get rid of it, but it's a great work vehicle for me, and I probably use that too much as an excuse, to be honest, because I found myself even throughout COVID, sort of how many apps are on social media on your phone? You got Instagram, you got Facebook, you got LinkedIn, you got what else is there? I'm
TikTok.
not there's TikTok, there's Snapchat, there's everything, right? So if you were to think, or WhatsApp, like all these sort of apps that are on our phone, and I'm only on 3 of them. So I'm on, say, there's Twitter as well, obviously. So
Yep.
let's say it was Instagram's probably my favorite. So I'll open Instagram and I'm like, okay, and I'll scroll through. Oh, this person's doing that. That's great. And it's everyone's highlight reel. So it's all very like, I'm doing this, and this happened, and all this kind of stuff. And there's nothing wrong with that. So you scroll through that, and it might take you 10 minutes to get your feed updated to where you were last time. And then you go, okay, so you close that up, and then you open up your Facebook, and you're like, oh, this person's doing that, and this person's doing that, and Johnny's up to this, and Bill's up to that. Okay, I'm finished on Facebook. I'm up to date. Right, now I'm going to go onto Twitter. What's everyone saying here? What's the commentary? Which can be very unkind. Twitter. Scrolling through. Okay, I'm up to date on that. I'll go on to LinkedIn. Cool, doing the same thing. I'm up to date. Oh, okay, that's taken me half an hour. Well, it's probably about time to refresh my Instagram. I'll go back to that. And it just ends up doing this
Yeah.
like continuous cycle, right?
Yes.
Which is so bad for us. Like I've got time limits on all of my apps, so no more than half an hour a day, because you can just, it's not even about productivity. It's like, well, I can probably afford to go for a walk or a swim, or I don't know, just take a mental break from social stimulation or technology. And it's a great.
How have you done that? How have you done that? And what are you
Yeah.
using to give it to have that time limit? Is it
Yeah,
an app as well?
no, you just go into your settings, and on Facebook, Instagram, and you just put, time limits on it. So,
Oh,
and
really?
it will either lock you out, or it just gives you a prompt. So mine just gives me a prompt saying, collectively today, you've been on Instagram for, 28 minutes, you've got 2 minutes left. And it's like, cool, that's my limit. I'm done. So you can put little.
I'm really curious on that. I'm really
I'll show
curious
you
on
how
that
to
only
do
because of business. Like the same way I use it as a business tool. So I'm very
it.
conscious of like this is how I grow what I do. This is how I actually share, inspire. Like I'm really keen on, if you've got a message, like what are you using for social media for? Are you using it to, I
Yeah.
believe, three buckets really, which is entertainment, inspiration, or education. So
Mm-hmm.
if you can provide one of those three, then you can pretty much have a positive impact on someone. But
Yep.
when does it tip over into a detrimental spiral, like you said there? And you're really right about, if you move, you almost cyclically hop from app to app. I've done it. Like you go, yeah, I've been on LinkedIn for 10, 15 minutes. Oh, wait, what have I missed on Instagram? Okay, what's missed my TikTok or Twitter? Where what's going on? And then you're an hour, 2 hours deep, right? But I
Yep.
really like that, because I'm pretty keen on, and I do this. I've been really strict on myself recently, because I think a form of unkindness I was showing to myself was I was working in periods when I should be resting to make the next step of work much better. And I think that's very
Mm-hmm.
common for whether you're an athlete or a business owner, right? We feel like we constantly have to be on the go. So I've found that through restricting my time and being very, very harsh on, or not harsh, but disciplined on myself, to say, if I can end here during the day, even if I know I've got a task to do, I'm going to have to move it tomorrow. But that then means that the time I'm trying to do that task, I don't let anything get in my way. Like I'm zooming in on it because I've created restriction. It comes from a pretty much a concept in sport, right? If you increase the or narrow down the focus or narrow down the parameters. If I'm talking a cricket analogy, I would say like create gaps in the field, which is high risk, and it makes you zone in more on where you need to bowl the ball or where you want to hit the ball, right? So it's creating that restriction to actually focus yourself. So I'm super keen to do that because then I feel if I know I've got a time limit on my apps, then I can utilize it much more efficiently and get what I need to get done on that day before I start going into that mega spiral.
Yeah, I had a friend who she took herself off social media, and so I reached out and I said, hey, like I haven't heard from you in ages. Just wanted to check in. Saw you weren't on socials anymore, and she gave me a buzz, and it was great. And she said, I'm completely fine. I was just probably noticing the same thing. I was getting stuck into a cycle. She said, but also what I found was that friends don't tell you anything anymore. And I said, what do you mean by that? And she said, well, I found that similar to what you've done is you reached out because I'm not on social media. But if I was on social media, you'd expect me to see your life updates and what you've been up to and all those sorts of things without actually communicating that directly to me.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's she's like, because I wouldn't even learn about friends having babies. I'd learn about it on Facebook. And she's like, and that's such an intimate and wonderful time. I want people to ring and tell me about this. And I was like, that's a really cool spin on it in that I guess like, apart from say your top 5 people in your life, you might tell the exciting news to, and everyone else, it's just on Instagram or Facebook. And that's how you're finding out about everyone's updates. I found that to be a really interesting thing. But I guess back to the question, why are kids suffering so much? When I went to school, we had I sound really old now, and I am getting on, but when I graduated, it was in 2005. And that was my final year 12 year. And I had a phone, but it was in case of an emergency. And it had like $2 of credit on it or something like that. And it could text, but you had to like type in A 3 times to get to the letter C. And I think it could text that way, and it could call obviously and receive calls. But it also had a game of Snake on it, and that was about it, right? I had a really cool school life. Like because I was so interested in sport, nothing really fazed me. I was always trying to get out of school to do sport. Never bullied, anything name called, nothing like that. Just was involved in a lot of different things. Had a great group of mates. And so I had this really cool school life or schooling journey. And every school, I went into a school yesterday and there were kids as young as 11 that had phones, right? And so at recess and lunchtime, you can't even have a no phone policy in schools now because parents crack the shits. And so the kids are on their phones doing all this kind of stuff. And the more I hear, obviously I go in and talk about kindness. I don't mention the word bullying or anything like that, but a lot of kids who are suffering in that way will come up to me and go, it's so tough because when I get to the school gates at 9 o'clock, I've got between the hours of 9 and 3 that people are going to target me, and it's for no reason. And they can because I'm different or whatever. And it breaks my heart to learn that and how hard that would be. But it's not then that it stops at 3, right? Because then they've got their devices and they're on Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat and WhatsApp and everything's pinging. And there's so much online trolling and abuse that happens, and kids are so cruel to each other for no real reason. And again, it's the highlight reel. We're just continuously comparing ourselves to others because what they're putting on social media, that they look better in that dress than I did, or that kid's better at footy than I am, or whatever it is. And I wish I had that life. And the grass isn't always greener. There's always complexities in everyone's life. And I think social media has played the biggest, I guess, it's had the biggest impact on our kids' well-being, to be honest. And I think we're suffering as a result of that. And as adults, we can sort of step back a little bit and go, I'm continuously scrolling, this is not healthy and all that kind of stuff. But for kids, that's sort of really how they communicate these days. It's all online, and it's especially, how do we expect them to be thriving when we've just kept them indoors for the last 2 years and they learnt via a computer screen only, like through conversations, like virtual conversations like this. And the way that they really learnt to communicate, or maybe it was further reinforced to them that this is how I'm going to communicate with my mates. It's with my device and it's via all of these apps. And you get them back into the schoolyard and they don't really know how to have a conversation with each other. They all do it still via Snapchat and all of that kind of stuff. And it's tough for them. Like, it really is, because that's their norm.
I'm sure you experience it, and I have with working with young kids this year, that it really does break my heart. There was one moment where I was working with this group of young girls, and the self-talk to themselves and even the talk to each other, you knew that the way they were talking to each other was not through malice. It was like a conditioning. It was just purely conditioned. It's like, I don't really mean the words that are coming out, but I'm saying them because I feel this is what I need to say, and I've seen and I've heard. And it was the first time I'd really almost broke down in front of them. I'm giving a keynote, and it's very interactive. And I just I found that even through asking them things like, because I draw upon their happy memories or things that have gone well in their lives, and who the person they want to be, and they just draw a blank sometimes. Because they just, so the first thing that's just flying through their mind is, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not loved enough, I'm not good looking enough, I'm not tall enough, I'm not this, that, the other. And then you have to remind them. Like, I love a quote that people don't need teaching, they just need reminding. Because I think genuinely kindness is a almost inbuilt trait for us. Look at how many viral videos there are of two young toddlers like hugging each other, kissing each other, and just playing. And it's like that. They're not evil. They're just pure happy. They're loved. They're joyous. So I think there's just this, the world gets in our way along the way, and it hides it and it blurs it from who we really want to be. And you just need reminding. You just constantly need reminding. So what are some of the ways in which you teach people through? I know you have the 12 elements or chapters of kindness, and we won't go into those because, one, we don't have time. And I want to ask this question of, what are some of the things that, through especially hard times that we've gone through, and even we'd say if someone's talking negatively to themselves and being unkind, what are sort of your go-tos, real easy ways of people finding kindness? I know that's maybe a broad question, but what would be one of your go-tos that you're like, this is something you can easily do, that you can start that journey of being kind?
Yeah, I'd say, compassion and empathy are the big ones there. But I've already sort of, a lot of the question I always give to, especially youth, girls and boys, like I say to girls, if you had a friend going through a struggle that you are right now, what's the advice that you give them? What would you tell them?
Yeah.
And 100% of the time they say, I'd tell them that they deserve better, or that they are beautiful, or that they are smart, or that they are, do you know what I mean? And they are enough. And as soon as you put that friend context in, that, like, how would you talk to your friend? What advice would you give this person? And it's like, well, it's like, well, there's your answer, right? And it's the same for boys. It's, if your mate come to you and he'd suffered this thing, or this had happened, what are you telling him? What are you saying to him? Would you support him? Of course I would. Why? Because he deserves it, and because he isn't that way, and he's just being really tough on himself and all that kind of stuff. And I think that, again, that self-reflection and that self-acceptance that we are all so different, and we all deserve to be celebrated regardless of background and all. It's super interesting, similar to what you said. You see the 3-year-olds hugging on, like, no one was ever born to hate. Like, I saw one that went viral, and it's a white boy and a black boy standing next to each other, and they got the same haircut. And I think the black haircut, and the white boy's mum said, what haircut do you want? He's like, I want to be like, he's like, yes. And she's like, what? And she's like, well, now everyone says that we're twins, but we actually are now. We're identical, because they had this haircut. They don't see skin color, or they don't care about your religious beliefs, or they're just two human beings that find comfort and strength and companionship with each other. And it's such a wonderful thing. So where's it all starting to go wrong for us? Like, what's the influence that is starting to creep in? And it was super interesting. I'm a very proud auntie. Like, whenever I'm not doing something, I love spending time with my nephews and my niece and my my mates' kids and stuff like that. And it's super interesting. It's almost like you see this little switch in them, and because I guess I'm a little bit more removed, not being a parent of them, you sort of get, they're born, and then it's all like giggly and all that kind of stuff through toddlers, and 3-year-olds love playing and doing all that kind of stuff. And again, no one's more important than anyone else, and there's no status or anything like that. And I think it's when it gets to the schoolyard, when their brains start to evolve a little bit more, and they're absorbing the information that potentially their parents are giving them, or whoever. And again, like, no one's perfect. Like, all of our experiences are shaped as we go. And so if a parent suffered traumatic experiences, their outlook's going to be shifted, and they're going to instill that on their kids. And I'll never forget it. When I was in my heavily avoidant stage of trying to process grief and loss, and not necessarily just through the grief of my partner, but like, the grieving of my career or my injuries and things like that. And it's a sort of a great little kind of exercise to go through. Like, when I was in highly avoidant states, I remember the psychologist trying to bring me on the journey would say to me, if you don't figure this out, like, do you want to be a mum? Do you want to be, even a great auntie? And it's like, of course I do. I'd pride myself on that. And I would love to be a mum one day. It's not in my immediate future, but I would love that. And she's like, if you don't deal with your trauma now, you're going to pass it on to your kid, or you're going to pass it on to your nephew. So if it was your child genetically, if I was to give birth, they won't ever be able to process my trauma, because it'll pass on through DNA, and they can't actually make sense of it. I can, because I lived through it, and it's up to me to process that. But if I was to give birth to a child genetically with unprocessed trauma, they'll often be going, why do I feel so anxious? Why do I feel like I've got unresolved stuff going on? They can't even figure it out. And how could you ever expect them to process it if they didn't live through it, or, see it, or whatever? And that's why there's so much vicarious trauma in Indigenous communities and things like that. And the poor things are so, their minds are completely, in stress for the most part of their life, because they don't know how to process the things that they've gone through. And I think the same can be said for any kind of mentorship that we have with children. If we're sort of passing on our experiences and our hate of the world or the situation or the environment or whatever, they're going to feel that as well. So not necessarily genetically, but, if I want to be the best auntie that I can be to my, godchildren or my genetic nephews and niece, then I want to be the best version of myself and present that to them, so that I'm instilling my values on them as well. And they're seeing an adult play out kindness and gratitude and compassion and all these sorts of things as well. So that was a profound moment where I probably started to delve a bit deeper into myself and go, I want to do the work here, if not for myself, then for my future. And that doesn't necessarily have to be a mum if that didn't happen. But, for all of the people in my life, my friends, my family, I want to always show up as the best version of myself. And I can't do that with unresolved things going on. So it really shifted me into that next gear for sure.
Jordan Peterson talks about treating yourself like you're someone you're responsible for, and I think that's just the best way. And Ethan Kross, psychologist, he talks about inner chatter and reframing your self-talk from a third person point of view, so talking to yourself as if you're coaching yourself, and it has a profound impact on how we do things. And that's what you're talking about. But the importance of, if you are a leader, if you are a parent, if you are a friend, if you are essentially responsible for someone, which in some way, shape or form we all are, then it's important, and you have a responsibility that giving that kindness, it rubs off, or giving the unkindness, it rubs off. And ultimately, how would you want to receive it in your life? That's super important. I totally agree. Look, I'm very conscious of time, and I don't want to leave you. You've got somewhere to be. So, and we could go on for another hour. Like, I'd love to get you back in the future if you ever have time. But I'm just interested to ask you this question of, how do you now show kindness to yourself? What is your way that you love showing kindness to yourself? You mentioned like getting your favorite coffee or something like that, but what is it that you do?
I do love coffee, so I always try and get my favorite coffee when I'm home. I love bike riding still, so tomorrow's my first day off in a month, that's not very kind, but just nature of the beast. So I'll be able to make up for that very soon. So tomorrow I'm going to go for a big bike ride. But for me, the best form of kindness is to be around the people that I care about the most. So as I said, I'm a really proud auntie, and I love my mates. So because I have such a, exciting kind of career, I guess, where I'm, meeting lots of new people all the time and interacting and doing all that, I guess the way that I recharge is just by, being with the people that I care about the most. And we don't do anything too adventurous, just having a coffee or having them around for dinner, or just connecting really with the people that I have a deep connection with. And that's my way of doing it for sure. Nothing extravagant, don't need the holidays, don't need any of that. I just need my people.
And giving kindness as well, it's like a form of being, it's not selfish, because it makes you feel good. Like whenever you do that, and leading on to where people can find you, the Kindness Factory, being online, you can log an act of kindness. And I think where are you at now? Last time I checked, you're at way over 4 million.
Yeah, about 4.2, I think, last time I checked. So I got a team now that sort of look after that. So originally, yeah, we just wanted to reach 1 million acts. I had a great job in sport, and it sort of catapulted off through life experiences and, you know, additional adversities that came after that. And then obviously speaking on stages around the world in front of really cool people. So it's now, I guess, that, you know, the kindness log is 4.2 million people that have logged an act. But I think the most important is our curriculum, where we can get in front of as many school kids as possible and teach the 12 building blocks to one, more kindness, but two, it's well-being and resilience as well, sort of all mashed together. So we're hoping that we start to see, you know, better mental health outcomes for kids. And, you know, when we're in a kind and safe enough environment, we probably allow our brains to absorb more information, so better academic outcomes as well as that. But then obviously, of course, more kindness in the world as well. So kindness to self and kindness to others as well. But yeah, we've got some good programs actually in the university pathways in the UK. So we've got a presence there through Kaplan, who are our education partner. So doing a lot of work with Victoria Wilson Crane out of the UK, and she's been a really incredible person to have in the lineup that we have at Kindness Factory, but based out of the UK and starting to infiltrate that university system as well, which has been nice.
I'm going to leave links in the show notes where people can go find out more. I know there's free resources for people to access and just get to know more. It's well worth diving into, but I'm so grateful for your time today, Kath. I'm so glad we got to do this. This has been one of my favorite podcasts, and I wish I had you for another 2-3 hours, and I'd love to get you back in the future, because there's so much more we could dive into, because this subject is just so important. It's just so important. And I think in sport, life, business, wherever you're at, that this being able to do this now in this period of time is more important than ever, because we have been so hard on ourselves. We're so judgmental. We're so tough on ourselves, and you're doing a great job. Just please don't stop. Don't stop. That's all I got for you. Don't slow down.
Thank you very much. It's been great to meet you, and absolutely, I'd love to come back for sure.
All right, brilliant. Thank you so much, Kath.
See ya.